Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Meat Made, and today we are mastering heat. I'm going to show you how we can get the proper calibration of heat for our 3D printers and filament to be able to get perfect prints. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that I went ahead and I chaptered out this video for you. So if there's something specific that you're really looking for, just jump to that section. But I'll tell you this right now, don't. Just stay here and just listen to me, because I'm going to teach you a bunch of cool things, and I can't guarantee I'm going to teach you something unless you watch all of it. Moving on. So when it comes to our temperatures when we're 3D printing, it's one of those crucial factors you have to just get right. It can affect so many things if you don't have the right temperature. It can affect your flow, your adhesion. It can minimize warping, the bonding between your layers, and how smooth of a finish you're going to have. And you may be thinking, Chris, I've already got my temperature set. It works great. Everything's fine. Have you really tested it? Do you know if that's the specific temperature? That's the big thing here. Because you could have a temperature that prints okay, but you might not have the correct temperature. If you have the correct temperature, those okay prints could be great prints, because you're getting the right amount of flow, adhesion to the layers, and bonding. And some of you out there might even be having some adhesion issues, and you've done all the other things and it's still not sticking very well. The temperature is one of those things that can help that filament just stick to the bed just a little bit better. And some people don't realize that when you're printing faster, you need to have a higher temperature so that flow can actually keep up with the speeds of your 3D printer. And another thing, if you have your temperatures too high, that's where you can get some sagging and drooping, especially in those overhang areas that, if you were at the right temperature, it really wouldn't be an issue. Now, the best way to find the right temperature for your filament is printing a temperature tower. And what a temperature tower does is it's a tower, and at each segment, it's actually printing at a different temperature. And it either goes hotter each level or it goes colder each level, depending on the tower that you're using. And this helps identify a lot of issues that you could potentially be having, like your stringing issues, or adhesion, or honestly flow. Now, one thing I have to mention, you don't have to print a temperature tower every single time you get a new filament. If your filament is the same brand, but maybe just different colors like this, like I've got Inland PLA white and Inland PLA tan. These are pretty much the same filament. You don't have to print a new temperature tower just because you change colors. But if you change types, that's when you want to print a temperature tower. I've even printed temperature towers for my PLA and my PLA Plus. And if you have specialty filaments, you definitely need to print a temperature tower. If you change brands, you need to print a temperature tower, because not all PLAs work the same. They all make them just a little bit different. So if you're staying within the same brands and the same types, you're perfectly fine. But if you change that type, I just want to make sure you understand, you have to print a temperature tower to be able to get the right amount of temperature for that filament. Because I have PLA, and then I also have Silk PLA from the same brand. They're completely different temperatures that they have to be printed at. So that's all the specifications of when you need to print a temperature tower. Now let's get into how to print a temperature tower. And let's jump into Cura and let me show you the best way for that. Alright, so now that we're in Cura, what we're going to do is actually come up here to the Marketplace, and we're going to install a plugin. And what the Marketplace is it's actually a bunch of plugins that you can add into Cura to be able to just help you with certain things. And what we're going to do is actually get Auto Towers Generator. 2.6.0 is the one that I'm actually going to be downloading. Now, if you can't find it, you can just come up here to the search bar and type Auto and then Towers. And then right here, it'll pop up for you. And all we're going to do is come over here and click Install. And after you hit Install, this little pop-up will come up saying, do you agree to all of the terms of this? And we're just going to click Accept, because if you decline, you don't get the plugin. Alright, so after you've installed a plugin, the important thing to do is you have to quit Cura and restart it. So let's go ahead and restart Cura. All right, so now we've restarted Cura and we are ready to get a temperature tower. So once that's installed, all we have to do is come up here to our extensions tab in our menu. Then we come on down here to auto towers. Now we have all of these settings available to us. And these are all calibration tests that we can run. Now we're going to come all the way down here to the temperatures. And I am going to be using PLA+. So I'm going to click on PLA+. And now once you've clicked on it, you're going to see this little tower that is shown up on your print bed. And let's take a look at that. So once it's on our print bed, we're going to see these segments. And at each segment, it's going to be printing at a different temperature. And your first layers are going to be printing at 230 degrees. And then each segment, it's going to move up by 5 and then end on 200 degrees. You can also note that in the corner right here, it says the type of filament you're printing. So this is PLA+, and you can see that PLA+ little word right there. And another nice thing is it says temperature on the side right here, because there are other settings and tests that we can do with this plugin that look the same, but it's testing different things. So this is a big help. Now, one thing important to do is you need to change the layer height to match what you're actually printing. So if I'm wanting to print at a 0.1 millimeter layer height, I need to go to my quality tab to layer height and change it to 0.1. But for this test, I wanted to do a 0.2. So the great thing here is it's already calibrated to the different temperatures and I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is change my layer height and I have to hit slice. So you can see that this is only using 6 grams of my spool. So this is only printing 6 grams of filament. There's 1,000 grams in a spool. I get this one complaint all the time. I'm not wasting all of my filament on a stupid test. This little tiny test can save you so much wasted filament. And it's 6 grams. It's actually less than 0.5% of our entire spool that we're using. So keep that in mind. I know some of you out there do not want to waste your filament, but if you don't have the right temperature, you're going to be wasting your filament. And it's going to be on prints on a lot more filament. So it's worth using this little bit of filament at the beginning of your spool just to make sure you have the right temperature. All right, real quick, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to all of these amazing people supporting me on Patreon this month. If you want to be like these awesome people, you'll get exclusive access to my private Discord servers where we talk about everything. 3D printing, painting 3D prints, and even sharing our fails. But it's a great community. You can also get access to all of my behind the scenes content where I show you what I'm working on, and you can even have the opportunity to vote on the videos that I make. This video right here was what was voted on for this month. They want some more Cura tutorials, and guess what? Here they are. If you're interested, I'll leave a link below. Other than that, let's get back to the video. So now we have our temperature tower all printed out, and if we just look at it, I mean, it looks great. Would you just look at it? You don't really see any blobs or zits, which is a very good thing, but this is a little deceiving when you're just looking at it like this. So let's get a little closer and really inspect this temperature tower, because from this vantage point, I mean, it looks like any temperature is good, but that's not true. All right, so here is with a macro lens, and we're at 230 degrees. And if we're really looking at that, that number doesn't look too clear, but when we're really looking in here, you can see that we have a little bit of drifting and oozing right there on the bottom corner. And we also have some stringing right there. And this is where you can really see some of those blobs and zits that we really couldn't see without really inspecting it. So you can see some of these overhangs and how they just kind of oozed and they don't look too great. So let's move up to 225. Now at 225, you can definitely see that stringing, and you see how your corners have a lot of that oozing and blobbing on the sides. Here, let's turn this around, and you can see how gross those look. So that is not a good layer. And now let's go to 220, and you can see right there, right in between the 2 and the 0, we have this big oozing zit. And that means our filament is just too hot. And also you can see all of this fine angel hair stringing. And that is something we definitely don't want. You can also see right there all these little divots and pop marks on the face of this square, and that is also something we don't want. That is where it was retracting when it was lifting up to the next layer. Now let's go to 215. And if we see here on 215, we've got more of this angel hair, and that is definitely something we don't want. We can also see right here on the corners and where these overhangs are, we've got some blobbing and some zits on it too. So 215, definitely too hot. Now we're going to look at 210. And then if we see here, we've got more of that stringing, but something else we have is we've got some more separation. We've got bigger separation on that bridge right there. And that is something we definitely don't want. Even though now, if we look at our sides, look how clean they're looking. I mean, we don't see any of those zits anymore, which means we're getting really close to our temperature. So moving to 205. So here on 205, we still have some more of this little bit of stringing. Not much, but man, it's still, that's something for me that's not good enough. That's not a good temperature. But I'm also looking at my sides, and my sides are looking really, really nice. Now for 200. And 200, you notice there's nothing there. We have hit our temperature. We still have a little bit of separation on this bridge, but this bridge is honestly, this is a torture test. And almost on every single one of them, you can see that we've got separation of some sort on these. So then what I want to do is I want to look all the way around and make sure my edges are looking nice and sharp. And I tell you what, look at that. That is looking nice. But as we go around it, we can see that right there on the top, there is a little bit of dripping and oozing, but this overhang, like I said, it is a torture test. It's like this on every single one. But if we look at the bottoms and see how they all pretty much droop, you're not going to get rid of that because this is a severe overhang. But we're going to look over here and see that there's no angel hair. But if you just look at that and how beautiful that is, versus down here when you can see how rough it is, and then all the way to the top, see how smooth that is. That right there means this is my optimal printing temperature at 200 degrees. So I went ahead and printed another temperature tower just to show you the differences between filaments. And this one goes all the way to 230 degrees to 180 degrees. And the big thing here is this was just with plain PLA. The one thing you're going to have to ignore is the dark bottom here because I changed my filament out and I didn't clear the nozzle enough, so it still had some of the residual color left. So let's quickly just go through this one too, so I can show you what really happened with this temperature tower because it acted just a little bit different. So let's start at the bottom again and we can see 230 degrees we have stringing. 225 we still have stringing. Yup, we still have it at 220. And there's some more at 215, 210. Do we have any? Yup, right there. 205. Oh, see that one down at the bottom? Still got some. So at 200, this one's looking really nice. Now let's go down to 195. And 195 is looking nice too. How about 190? We're going to go across 190. Now let's go to 185. And you can see there, we're starting to get some stringing. Now we have 180, and if you see here, it is an absolute mess because it couldn't keep up. It couldn't keep pushing out that filament at 180 degrees. So it got almost to it, but when it started getting to the bridge, you can see that it just stopped pushing it out. And it would just come out in spurts because the filament was not hot enough. And this is what it looks like when you're printing way too low because we've got some stringing all the way through it here. Then we also have all of these lines that couldn't even finish because we were just forcing this through the nozzle and it just was not working out. So this right here, that means that we're printing way too low. So once we realize this, now we have to go back down and find the right temperature. And 190 was looking really good all the way to 200. So what we're going to do is we're going to inspect the sides. We can see right where the bridge, this was oozing out a lot. And then right here at 195, it wasn't so much. And then it's a little bit less on the 200. So for me, I would probably go with a 200 because if you see on the edges of that triangle right there coming off, those edges aren't looking too clean. They're looking worse here. And if we go around, we can see that that's at 190, that's at 195. So if we spin this around, the middle one right here is a 195, but the 200 degrees, it's looking a lot cleaner. And then if we go down, it starts getting messed up more. So this tells me that 200 is the optimal print temperature. And I'm not really surprised because this is the same brand of filament, it's just PLA and PLA Plus. And it seems to give me the same results every single time I interchange either one of them. So now that we've inspected our temperature tower and we really know what we're looking for to find that optimal printing temperature, let me just take a second and explain the 3 main reasons why we need to find the correct temperature for our filament. The first one, we can prevent failures. You can get failures if you do not have the right temperature for your filament. You can easily get clogs, you can get lots of stringing, and honestly, you can also just get completely failed prints because of all of these things and other things. The second reason, you could be wasting time and money. First, for time, well, honestly, if you get a bunch of failed prints because you have the wrong temperature settings, that's going to waste a lot of your time. The second part of that, when it comes to money, well, failed prints, obviously you're going to be wasting your filament, which is money. But also, over time, if you're printing too hot, it could be pushing out way too much filament that it's not needed. So that is just wasting more filament. And the third reason, let's be honest, if you've got the right temperature, your quality is going to look a lot better. We saw on the temperature tower all of those little zits and divots. You don't want that on your 3D prints. So being able to increase your quality just by having the right temperature, it's a no-brainer for me. So I guess you just gotta ask yourself, is it worth printing a 2-hour test print to be able to have better quality, save time, and avoid failed prints? Let me answer it for you. Yes, it is worth every second. So just do it. I'm strongly encouraging you, if you have never printed a temperature tower, print one. Because you might be thinking, I've never needed to print one and everything turns out great. Does it? Because if you are just a few degrees off, you saw how we had those issues. Maybe you are just a few degrees off and you're close, but you're not perfect yet. So please, I'm begging you. I want your prints to be beautiful. So you absolutely should be printing a temperature tower. So go ahead, you can pause the video and then come back to me when you're done. So we've gone over all the importance of being able to get the right temperature for your filament. So now let's get into some of the settings. And specifically, let's start at our initial print temperature. So you can change the temperature on your first layer. And you might be wondering, why would I need to do that if I found my optimal print temperature with a temperature tower? Good question. Now this is for those of you that have bed adhesion issues. If you're having issues with that stick of that first layer, one of the things you can do is just increase your temperature just a little bit for your first layer. And this will allow that filament to be even hotter and it will ooze out of that nozzle and stick to that bed a lot better. And that will give you a better bond. And this is just one of the factors that you can change to be able to get better bed adhesion. Better bed adhesion. I like saying better bed adhesion. I digress. So now let's go into Cura and let me show you where we can change these settings. So the first thing, if you do not have all of these settings, one of the things you want to do is click on this little hamburger icon, and then you want to go ahead and click all. And that will give you every single thing that you need to have. So let's come down to material, and then we're going to click the drop down on that. Now here we're going to see printing temperature. This is where we're going to actually set our overall print temperature. And for me, like I said, 200, that was my optimal printing temperature. Now, this next one right here is our printing temperature initial layer. So this is our very first layer. So if I was having bed adhesion issues, I would go up maybe 10 degrees, and I would have this at 210 degrees. So then the next thing we have is our initial print temperature. This is basically how hot the printer is going to get before it starts 3D printing. Now, if you have changed your initial print temperature, I would definitely match this number. So I would say this would be 210 degrees. That way, when it starts printing, it's already at the right number for me. Now, one thing to realize, if you do not actually have those two numbers set, it's going to print at 200 degrees and start printing, and then the nozzle will start heating up to 210 degrees. So, if you want the very first bit of filament that is laying down on your build plate to be at that temperature that you set for your initial layer, set this number to the same number as that. Another setting we have in here is our final print temperature. And what that is your very last layer, the nozzle can start to cool down if you want it to. Now, some people like to bring down the temperature just a little bit on their very last layer. And what this can do is this can cause a little bit of a smoother top layer print. Personally, I don't really ever change this setting because I think it's fine the way it is. But let me show you. So right here, we can change our final printing temperature. So if you wanted to bring this, say, down to like 195 or 190, you absolutely could. But like I said, for me personally, I don't like to change this setting. I just leave it at whatever it's been printing at all this time. So this next part is all about our bed and the temperature of our bed. And this is vitally important, especially for specific filament types. Because when you're printing filaments at a higher temperature, you have a bigger chance of warping or peeling, shrinkage, all of those things when the plastic starts to cool down. Because having a bed that's nice and hot for your filament, that will really help you prevent that peeling. Because that peeling is because it's cooling too fast and it's starting to just kind of pull together. So you don't want that. So if you're wondering what temperature you really need to print at, if it's starting to peel up, maybe just increase it a little bit, maybe by 5 or 10 degrees. Personally, when I'm printing, I get a really good result when I'm printing at 60 degrees. So first, let me show you where we can change that setting in Cura. So here's where you can change your build plate temperature right here. And I've already got it set to 60. Personally, I think anywhere between 50 degrees and 60 degrees is a great temperature for PLA. Now, some of those other specialty filaments, you're probably going to have to go a lot hotter. So a nice little tip, most of the manufacturers out there making filament will actually tell you what the recommended build plate temperature is. So this is Endlin filament right here, and it says right here, print anywhere between 25 and 60 degrees Celsius. I like to keep it at 60. Nice and warm, no warping. So we have one more setting when it comes to our build plate temperature. And that is our initial build plate temperature. And this one is just as important as our initial printing temperature, because these two things combined can really help with your adhesion. So if you're having adhesion issues and you want a better adhesion to your build plate, you want to definitely increase this. So if I'm at 60, I might want to go up to 70 degrees and just go up a little bit more. That way, your build plate is nice and hot, and your filament is nice and hot because we've increased that initial printing temperature. That is allowing that filament to just kind of come out there and ooze and get a really good grip to that bed. But I do want to say, if you're having bed adhesion issues, these aren't the only two factors. You also have to think about your speed. So you need to slow down and just try to print a lot slower for that initial layer speed. So let me show you where we change it. So our next setting after build plate temperature is build plate temperature initial layer. So for our very first layer, if we want this print bed to be really heated up, this is where we would change it. And I would say go up maybe about 10 degrees. So I would do it maybe at 70 if I was having some build plate adhesion issues. So we have one more setting when it comes to the temperatures in the material settings, and that is our scaling factor shrinkage compensation. I know that's a lot to say, but basically what it means is if I have, let's say, a cube and it's supposed to be 10 millimeters, okay? And when I print it, it actually turns out to be 9 millimeters. And that is the shrinkage of our plastic when we're 3D printing. So what we can do is adjust this setting to accommodate for that, and then it will 3D print it at 10 millimeters. So how do we actually find what our shrinkage compensation percent is? It's honestly pretty easy. If you know your cube is supposed to be 10 millimeters, and you measure the final cube that's 3D printed and say it's at 9 millimeters, all we have to do is divide the number of what it's supposed to be by the number of what it actually printed. So 10 divided by 9, it's 1.111111. So we just got to move our decimal point over 2 spaces and we have 111%. I know this is probably a little confusing, so let me show you what that actually does in Cura. So if we come down here, we can see scaling factor shrinkage compensation, and it is at 100%. And what that means is this is going to print this model exactly how it looks right now. So let's just say, for example, that this is not the right size. It prints too small. So all I would do is I would come right here, and this is where I would put my 111%. Now, the one thing you want to notice is this dark gray area. This is the actual perimeter of what's going to be 3D printed. So if we slice this, this is what it's actually going to 3D print. But if I bring this down, you can see this is the original size of the model. And look, here's the corner of it, and right here is the corner of what it's going to be 3D printing. So this will actually make it bigger. Now let's say that our 3D print is actually printing too big and we need to make it a little bit smaller. So that's where we would come back to our scaling factor shrinkage compensation, and then we're going to make that under 100%. So let's say I would make it 90 because I did the math and it was 90%. So then if we slice that, we can see that now the printed cube is inside this gray box, and this gray box is the actual dimensions of our model that we're 3D printing. So if it's getting too big, we want to go under 100, and if it's printing too small, we want to go over 100. So the next two settings deal with our horizontal and our vertical when it comes to our scaling factor shrinkage compensation. Now the horizontal is only if you're wanting it to be wider or thinner, and your height is perfectly fine. But on the other side of that, if your 3D prints are turning out perfect on the sides, but the top is not the right dimension, this is where you can use your vertical scaling factor shrinkage compensation. So let me go ahead and show you how to change these two settings in Cura. So we're going to change this back to 100%, but now we're only going to go to our horizontal scaling factor shrinkage compensation. And now I'm going to go ahead and make this at, let's just say, 120, so you can really see what's happening here. So if we look down here, we can see that this is coming out all the way right here, but we also don't see anything on the vertical. This is right up against the edge. But if we look at it at this angle, we can see that the X and Y have been scaled out so it can compensate for that size. And just like we did previously, if we want it smaller because it's printing too big, we can go to 90% and slice that. And now we can see that it's shrunk in, and if we see our top here, it stops right at the top of our model. So let's bring this back to 100%. Now the next thing is the vertical scaling factor shrinkage compensation. Now this works the exact same way as the horizontal scaling, but this is only focusing on the vertical. So our X and Y are not going to be affected in any way. So if we need this to be a little bit taller, what we can do is we can come in here and let's say, let's go to 110%. Now if we go into our preview, we can see how it just jumped up, and it is printing a lot taller than it needs to be. So right here is where our original is at, and you can see it just keeps going. So if you need it to be a lot taller, this is where you can change it. And just like we've done on the previous ones, we can make this a lot smaller. So if it's printing too thick of a layer lines, we can go to 90 and then slice that. And now this is the top of our layer, and then you can see this is the actual top of our 3D model. I know there's a lot to it, and I've had enough of saying scaling factor, shrinkage, compensation. Say that 10 times fast and see how well you do. But anyway, this is really for those of you that are looking for those precision prints. They have to be specific sizes. So if you're prototyping things, you should really pay attention to this, because this can make your prints just that perfect size if you're just a little bit off. And another thing, it really depends on the type of filament you're using, because some filaments just naturally shrink. If you're using ABS, that typically will shrink 2 to 3%. So that's quite a bit. And if you're looking for precision prints, you're going to need this setting. But if you're going with like PLA, it has very minimal shrinkage. So you might not be experiencing the same issues as somebody else printing a specialty filament, or let's say ABS. And even nylon, it has its own issues. So just keep all of these factors in mind when you're 3D printing and you're trying to get specific sizes. So now we've covered everything that you need to know when it comes to your temperature in Cura and printing the right temperatures for your filament by printing, what is it? Yes, temperature towers, because we are going to be printing temperature towers from now on. This day forth, you shall print temperature towers. Every single time there is a new filament type that you're changing to, or a different brand that you're changing to. They're so different. I mean, you have to. No, but seriously, start printing temperature towers. So please, in the comments, tell me that you have started or you already do print temperature towers. I would love to hear from you, because you know what? You're awesome. I'm just gonna say it. But you now know how to get your 3D prints to the exact dimensions that you need using your scaling factor shrinkage compensation. Whew. Luckily, that's the last time I'm saying that. So now all of you are masters of temperatures in Cura. So if you've enjoyed this video, I've got another video where I am actually going through every single setting that I look at when I'm setting up my 3D print files, because we're going through a lot of settings right now, but there's certain ones that I always have to keep an eye out on. And you can see all of the things that I think are important in this video. Better bond to your print. Blip, 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 blip. I don't know what I was trying to say there. High enough for it to blah, 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 blah. Coming down to be blah, 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 blah. No. Horizontal scaling shrinkage compensation. My God. Shrinkage compensation. Compensating, eh? Scaling factor, shrinkage, compensation. Let's see if I can remember that. I'm not going to remember that. Scalage. Scalage factor. My God, I can't say that. This is going to be tough. This is so hard. Scaling factor, shrinking compensation. This is the worst word ever. I feel like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Scaling factor, creeping, creeping. I can't. This setting is killing me. I can get through this. I challenge anyone to say this as much as I'm saying it. My God. Our horizontal scaling factor, shrinkage, compensation. Whew. Just for me. And then tell me in the comments that you printed a temperature tower. And if you haven't, don't leave me a comment. I just don't want to hear from you. No. Okay, done. Done! Scaling factor, shrinkage, compensation. Thanks a lot for watching. I wish you a great day, and I'll see you right here in this video.